Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Apocalypse Report. And my name is Robert King. I was thinking as I turned the camera on that the title Apocalypse Report may give some people the wrong impression. Although my perspective is from that of Jehovah's Witnesses, I don't share their view that the apocalypse has already occurred. And that's really what the Watchtower teaches, that the day of the Lord began in 1914. That's really how the book of Revelation opens up. If you recall, John said, by inspiration I came to be in the Lord's day. And during the Lord's day, all of these judgments are revealed. And according to the Watchtower, they've all been revealed. The seven seals have been opened. The seven angels have blown their trumpets. The seven bowls, the plagues have been poured out. Satan has been thrown out of heaven long ago. The beast has received the sword stroke and revived. The two witnesses have come and gone. I'm not sure where they are, but and on it goes. But my whole online presence for these past 13, 14 years has been to refute 1914, not necessarily the faith and teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses, but 1914 as a way of pointing to a future fulfillment of all of these things. Well, at any rate, one of the things I'd like to focus on in this apocalypse report is that in the 13th chapter of Revelation regarding the beast that receives the mortal head wound and comes back to life. And when it comes back to life, it is granted to wage war against the holy ones and conquer them. Something Watchtower says, yeah, that took place back during the First World War. Anyway, actually the 13th chapter of Revelation is really a continuation, a different snapshot, you might say, of a prophecy in the book of Daniel. In the 7th chapter. And in that 7th chapter, Daniel had been given a vision of a series of different beasts, not just one seven-headed beast, but each of those heads is pictured as a different beast. And he saw 4 beasts. And the reason it was 4 is because 2 of the world powers had already come and gone by the time that Daniel was in Babylon. But the first beast he saw was like a lion with wings that were plucked out, and that was Babylon. And then a bear, which represented the Medo-Persian Empire, and then a leopard with 4 heads and wings. And those 4 heads represented the 4 generals that took over the kingdom after Alexander the Great died. Well, the beast of Revelation has a composite body made up of those different components. It has the mouth of a lion, the feet of a bear, and the body of a leopard. But 7 heads, as I mentioned. But Daniel saw a 4th beast, and he was particularly interested in this 4th beast because it was ruling at the time that the Son of Man comes on the scene. And it was particularly fierce and terrible and terrifying, had iron teeth and copper claws and was crushing everything. And it too waged war against the holy ones. It says in Daniel, for a time, times, plural, and half a time, which corresponds with the 42 months that the beast in the 13th chapter of Revelation wars against and conquers the holy ones. So I'd like to, I've got my little iPad here. This is so handy. I wish I would have, the society would have had the jw.org thing when I was a pioneer. And take this out in the ministry and you can have it in any language that you want practically. And anyway, it's a great tool. So anyway, after seeing this terrifying beast, Daniel had another vision, seeing the Son of Man, and it says he was coming on the clouds of heaven, and it says, look, he gained access to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him up close before that one. You know, you'll never hear a Trinitarian comment on this because it clearly shows that Jesus could not possibly be God. The Son of Man is coming and they bring him up. He gains an audience with God. And what happens? And to him, that is the Son of Man, which we know is Jesus, there were given rulership, honor, and kingdom, and the peoples, nations, and language groups should all serve him. So God gives him the kingdom. He confers upon him the authority, takes it away from the wild beast, which obviously hasn't happened yet. But anyway, another interesting point. Did you notice that the Son of Man is given rulership over the peoples, the nations, and language groups? You know, the churches of Christendom, they teach that, you know, all good people are going to heaven. There's no one who's going to live on the earth forever. The great crowd of Revelation, they're angels, because it says in the 19th chapter, a great crowd of angels. They don't realize that there can be two great crowds. And here, obviously, there are language groups and peoples whom Jesus is going to rule over when he comes in his kingdom. So anyway, and it goes on to mention that not just the kingdom is given to the Son of Man, but it says that the kingdom is given to the holy ones as well. So didn't Jesus refer to his little flock that the Father has approved of giving you the kingdom? And in Revelation, Jesus speaking to those who would be faithful, he says, you will rule with me and crush the nations with an iron rod. So obviously, again, that hasn't happened. But it would make sense that the holy ones are conquered after Jehovah has gathered them all together, after they have been sealed. And then that's it. And they are brought under extreme persecution and ultimately martyred, so that in the blink of an eye, they are in the heavens with Jesus when he comes to annihilate the beast. Well, it is interesting now with terrorist incidents happening virtually on a daily basis in the United States or in Europe. The whole system is being destabilized. And we're reading about Deutsche Bank, one of the biggest banks in the world, and has something like $72 trillion of, mind-boggling number, $72 trillion of derivatives contracts, much larger than Lehman Brothers, which, if you recall, about 10 years ago, almost brought the whole system down. And now even the IMF is saying that Deutsche Bank presents the greatest systemic risk to the whole financial system. That means that one bank, if it goes down, just pulls everything down into a black hole, whatever analogy you want to use. And at the same time, as this financial system is wobbling, you'd never know it looking at the stock market. I mean, as world trade is collapsing, the stock market is reaching all-time highs. Why? The central banks are buying, pushing up the stock prices, even as the underlying economy crashes. Well, I won't go off on that tangent, but the power that has been invested in this empire of the beast is losing its power. And that's why it's pushing war with Russia and war with China. And we've seen recently that the so-called Brexit destabilized Europe momentarily, at least. And other nations are talking about exiting the European Union. But at some point, the whole thing is going to crumble along with the economy. But we might expect this little horn to emerge in the future as a world government. And I would expect the three horns to be plucked out: America, Britain, and France. When we look at the activity of the central banks, I mentioned they're bidding up stocks. At some point, though, and they're buying government debt as well. What's the Bible principle, though? The borrower becomes the slave of the lender. And even though the giant banks are way beyond bankrupt, the debts are considered legitimate. So at some point, I would expect the banks to pull the plug and to start massively shorting stocks and bonds and just drive everything down to bankrupt everyone else. And in that way, they'll come back in and claim ownership. If you have a share of stock, that's you own a piece of that company. And if you drive everybody else, same thing for governments. The United States is something like $19 trillion in debt. Well, if the central bank buys up all of that debt, look what happened to Greece when they went into bankruptcy. The bankers basically started foreclosure on the country, taking historic places, islands, laying claim on the physical assets, even though the debt mostly was fictitious. Bookkeeping fraud. So at some point we can expect this capitalist system, it's already been hijacked by the bankers, we can expect it to be used as a tool for driving the world into communism, where a single entity, a small clique of ultra-wealthy bankers will end up owning the world, including the governments and the states. Everybody's in debt. And the banks just invent money and people pretend that they go along with the fraud, that it's real, and it establishes their ownership. Well, I expect the United Nations at some point to be vested with this power that's the bankers are acquiring for themselves. They can't govern the world by themselves. So the UN is there as sort of a placeholder, you might say, an empty shell. It's virtually powerless now. But there's talk about a new world currency, a single currency, and I expect something like that where after the banks establish their ownership, money is just dissolved. It will have served its purpose, and then a new form of currency, a new financial system based on the communist model. One world government that owns and controls virtually everything. And that will be the little horn that makes these blasphemous, arrogant, swelling expressions against God and wars and conquers the holy ones. So, we'll see how that turns out, won't we? Another passage that I would like to, and this is great, so you can just bookmark a Bible passage and go right there. Now, this may be a curious point for Jehovah's Witnesses. In the 13th chapter of Mark, Jesus spoke about the conclusion in 3 different gospel accounts, and each one of them has a little different detail. But in Mark, Jesus, he mentioned nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be food shortages in one place after another. And it said, these are the beginning of pangs of distress. Well, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that, that was 1914 and all of that. But reality will have a way of intervening. I believe we'll see nation rising against nation in the immediate future. But it's what Jesus said will take place next. And I'd like to share that with you. In verse 9, he says, "As for you," he's speaking to this chosen ones, his holy ones, "look out for yourselves. People will hand you over to courts, and you will be beaten in synagogues," or kingdom halls, "and be put on the stand before governors and kings for my sake, for a witness to them." That's what the two witnesses are going to do, right? In the 10th chapter of Revelation, where Jesus interacts with John. He's the strong angel that stands with one foot on the sea, one on the earth, claiming the earth for himself, and he hands John a little scroll, eat it, and he says, "Go, witness again to kings, and it prophesy again." Okay, anyway, so Jesus said, you'll stand before kings and governors. Verse 10, "Also, in all the nations, the good news has to be preached first." First before what? Well, he went on expanding upon that. "And when they are taking you to hand you over, do not be anxious beforehand about what to say. But whatever is given you in that hour, say this, for you are not the one speaking, but the Holy Spirit is." The good news has to be preached first. So this handing over of the chosen ones, and they're standing before governors and kings, this wild beast, during that 42-month period, it happens after the good news is preached, not during. Jehovah's Witnesses are preaching the good news of the kingdom in hundreds of languages. And this little jw.org and the little devices are being used effectively to that end. But when the system crashes, that's an end of the preaching of the good news. And then will begin this period, times and half a time, when the holy ones are tested. It says they have to endure. This means endurance for the holy ones in the 13th chapter of Revelation. And at some point, Jehovah's Spirit comes upon them. They give a last testament to the rulers of this system of things. They experience a martyr's end, and then the end will come. And that's what Jesus went on to say. The one who endures to the end is the one that will be saved. Being saved doesn't mean surviving in the flesh. It means Jesus was saved, right? But he died. He was saved because Jehovah resurrected him into the spirit world. Well, the holy ones won't even have to sleep in the grave for three days like Jesus did. As I mentioned, in the blink of an eye, Paul said, in the twinkling of an eye, from flesh to spirit. And that's how they'll be with Christ in heaven when the armies come to vanquish the beast. Thank you for watching this edition of the Apocalypse Report.